A racist Karen tried to destroy my farm, but she ended up paying the ultimate price. Living as a black farmer in this town has never been easy, but nothing could have prepared me for what this entitled woman did. She thought she could destroy my livelihood just because she didn't like seeing a successful black man. When she cut my farm's power lines, she thought she won, but I had something she didn't: the law on my side. And by the time I was done, she was drowning in a $50,000 fine. The hum of the irrigation system was like a heartbeat, steady and strong. Marcus Carter had spent years perfecting it, ensuring his crops received just the right amount of water at the right times, powered entirely by solar energy. It was his pride and joy, a testament to his resilience in a town that had tried to push him out from the moment he arrived. Outsiders did not last long in Clifton Ridge. And a black farmer. They had made it clear he was never meant to last at all. But Marcus did not break. He built his farm from the ground up, learning the land, outsmarting the biased banks that nearly denied him loans, and proving every naysayer wrong. He had customers now, contracts with grocery stores, and a growing reputation. And that drove people like Karen Whitmore insane. She lived in a massive estate just past his property line, the kind of place with towering white pillars and a winding driveway long enough to fit a football field. She had money, influence, and an attitude that reeked of entitlement. From the moment he moved in, she had complained. "This farm is an eyesore," she had said more than once. "We are trying to maintain a certain standard in this neighborhood." She had called the town council, filed noise complaints, even sent a petition around the neighborhood trying to get his permits revoked. Nothing worked. And now, Marcus was sure. She had just crossed the final line. The first thing Marcus heard was the shrill beeping of his security alarm. His eyes flew open. He bolted upright in bed, his pulse hammering as he tried to make sense of the noise. Then he saw it, pitch-black darkness. Through the window, where there should have been security lights casting a soft glow over the farm, there was nothing. The night was swallowing everything. Marcus jumped out of bed, grabbed his flashlight and sprinted outside. The second he stepped onto the porch, the weight of what had happened hit him like a freight train. His entire farm was dead. The security cameras, office, the irrigation system, silent. The refrigerated storage for his produce, completely shut down. Panic gripped his chest. This was not just a power outage. This was sabotage. Marcus rushed to the side of his house where the main power box was, flipped the breaker. Nothing. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw something, or someone. At the edge of his property, near the fence line, stood a shadowy figure. Someone was watching him. Marcus narrowed his eyes and raised his flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, and then he saw her, Karen Whitmore, standing in her silk robe, her blonde hair cascading over her shoulders, her arms crossed as if she was merely observing something amusing. But it was not just her presence that sent rage coursing through Marcus's veins. It was what she held in her hand. Wire cutters. The realization was like a slap to the face. His eyes darted down, and there it was. His power lines, severed. Exposed wires lying in the dirt like lifeless veins. She did this. Marcus clenched his jaw so hard it ached. His heart was a drum, pounding louder than the alarm that had woken him. "Karen." She just smiled. And then she spoke. "You should really consider moving," she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "This place would look so much better without all of this." She gestured lazily toward his fields, like she was pointing at trash instead of acres of thriving farmland. Marcus felt his breath hitch. He could hear the blood roaring in his ears. "People like you do not belong here," Karen continued, as if she was commenting on the weather. Then, casually, like it was nothing, she tossed the wire cutters onto her porch and turned to walk inside, as if she had not just destroyed thousands of dollars worth of his livelihood, as if she had not just endangered his business, his farm, his future, as if she would never face a single consequence. Everything inside him screamed to march over there, to demand answers, to make her pay right now. But Marcus was not stupid. Karen was wealthy, connected, protected, The kind of woman who could play victim with a single tear and have the whole town rushing to her defense. But there was one thing Karen had never accounted for. Marcus knew the law, and she had just made the worst mistake of her life, because when you cut power to a farm, it is not just an inconvenience, it is a felony. And Marcus Carter, he was about to make sure Karen paid the price. Marcus Carter had fought for every single inch of his farm. He had fought for it the day he signed the deed, when the realtor hesitated before handing him the papers, stammering, "You sure you want to settle here? This town, well, it is not always friendly to outsiders." He had fought for it the day he applied for his loan, sitting across from a bank manager who barely looked at him before shaking his head and muttering about risk assessments and denied applications. And he had fought for it every single day since, against a town that had made it clear he was not welcome. The signs had been subtle at first. When he walked into the local hardware store, the employees would glance at each other, silently deciding who had to serve him. When he tried to buy farming supplies, his prices were always mysteriously higher than those of his white counterparts. And at the farmers' market, that was the biggest slap in the face. The prime spots, the ones near the entrance where customers flocked first, were always reserved for the white farmers. Marcus? He was shoved into the farthest corner, barely visible unless someone went looking for him. But he did not quit. Marcus had always been a fighter. If they were going to hike up prices, he would grow smarter, more self-sufficient. He studied solar energy, smart irrigation, organic crop rotation, techniques that would keep him from relying on biased suppliers. If they tried to block his access to markets, he would sell directly to customers online, form partnerships with local restaurants, build his own network, and slowly, but surely, his farm began to thrive. Karen Whitmore had been a thorn in his side from the moment he set foot in Clifton Ridge. She was the self-appointed gatekeeper of the neighborhood, a woman who believed her money and last name carried more weight than any law. And Marcus? He was her worst nightmare, a black man running a successful farm. Just 5 minutes from her estate, she saw his presence as a personal insult. At first she tried to pretend it was not about race. She filed noise complaints to the town council, claiming his irrigation system was disruptive. She told the zoning board that his barn was an eyesore, that it was ruining property values for the wealthy homeowners nearby. When that did not work, she got nastier. She spread rumors, told the other white farmers that Marcus used cheap, unsanitary labor to undercut their prices, that his produce was contaminated. She even called the health department on him. Marcus would never forget that day. The inspector had arrived unannounced, rifling through his greenhouse, checking his storage, asking about his business practices. The man had looked embarrassed when he finally said, "I am sorry, Mr. Carter. Someone filed a complaint, but everything here is in perfect shape." Karen must have fumed when she got the report that Marcus passed with flying colors. But she did not stop. Nothing worked. And that had driven her over the edge, cutting the power to his farm. That was not just an act of sabotage. That was war. Marcus took one last look at the severed power lines, his jaw clenching as he replayed Karen's smug voice in his head. "People like you do not belong here." She thought this would break him. That the financial blow, the stress, the sheer exhaustion of fighting her would finally make him pack up and leave. But she had underestimated him. Marcus had spent his entire life proving people like her wrong, and this time, she was going to pay for it. Marcus's hands shook as he reached for his phone. Rage in his chest was like wildfire, spreading with every second. Karen's smug face burned into his memory. He could still hear her voice, soaked in arrogance. "Maybe you should learn your place. Not tonight. Not ever." He dialed 911 and took a deep breath as the line rang. "This is emergency services. What is your emergency?" Marcus steadied his voice. "My power lines were cut. Someone trespassed on my property and deliberately sabotaged my farm. Are you in immediate danger?" "No," Marcus said, gripping the phone tighter. "But my business is, and I have a suspect," the dispatcher sighed. "Officers will be sent to your location." But Marcus already knew what was coming. The squad car pulled up 10 minutes later, its red and blue lights flashing against the darkened fields. 2 officers stepped out, Officer Grayson and Officer Miller. Marcus knew them well enough. They had never been on his side before, and judging by the bored expressions on their faces, tonight was no different. Grayson strolled up, flashlight in hand. "Mr. Carter, you called in about some power issues." Marcus exhaled sharply. They were already downplaying it. "Not power issues," he corrected. "Someone cut my power lines." He gestured toward the severed cables, their exposed ends lying in the dirt. "That is felony property damage and sabotage of agricultural production." Grayson gave a half-hearted nod, like he was barely listening. "Uh-huh. And you saw someone do this?" "Yes." Marcus crossed his arms. "Karen Whitmore. She was standing right over there when I came outside." Grayson's expression barely changed. He did not even glance toward Karen's house. Miller, the younger officer, chuckled. "Come on, man. It is just some wires. Do you have video proof of her actually cutting them?" Marcus narrowed his eyes. "No, but—" Grayson held up a hand. "Then it is just speculation." He turned, already heading back toward the squad car. "Nothing we can do here." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. "Are you serious? She is a well-respected woman in this town," Grayson added over his shoulder. "We cannot just go around accusing people without evidence." Marcus clenched his fists. This town. Karen had known exactly what she was doing. And now, she was watching it all unfold like a show. Marcus turned, and there she was, standing on her porch, arms crossed, a self-satisfied grin on her face. The officers might as well have rolled out a red carpet for her victory. She tilted her head and gave a mocking little wave. Then, as if to twist the knife deeper, she called out, "Maybe you should just sell the farm, Marcus. Maybe someone who actually belongs here will buy it." A sharp, bitter laugh followed her words. Marcus could feel his heart beat in his throat. His vision blurred around the edges, his hands flexing at his sides. The old Marcus, the one who had spent years swallowing his anger, would have let it go, but not this time. Not when everything he had built was on the line. Karen thought she won, but she had underestimated him. Marcus did not go inside. Instead, he took a deep breath and made 2 phone calls. The first, his lawyer, Denise Parker. Denise had been fighting discrimination cases in Clifton Ridge for over a decade. If anyone knew how to turn this around, it was her. "Marcus," she answered groggily, her voice thick with sleep. "It is almost midnight." "What happened?" Marcus told her everything. The severed lines, Karen's smirk, the police's refusal to act. There was a long silence. Then, Denise's voice hardened. "Cutting power to a farm? That is not just property damage. That is a felony offense under the Agricultural Protection Act." Marcus's grip on his phone tightened. "You are sure?" Denise exhaled. "Oh, I am positive. And Karen just gave you a gift. If she is publicly mocking you about it, that means we can push for intent." Marcus's lips pressed into a firm line. Intent. Malice. The very things that turned a petty crime into a serious charge. His second call? To his friend at the State Agricultural Department. Aaron Ramirez had worked in enforcement for years. If there was one person who could escalate this, it was him. And when Marcus told him what had happened, Aaron did not hesitate. "She cut power to a working farm?" Aaron asked sharply. "That is not just a fine. That is a potential federal offense." Marcus felt something shift inside him. For the first time that night, he felt something besides rage. He felt power. The next morning, the power company arrived. Marcus stood with his arms crossed as a team of workers assessed the damage. It did not take long before one of them whistled low. "This was no accident," the foreman muttered. "Someone deliberately cut these lines." Marcus nodded. "And how much will it cost to repair?" The foreman rubbed his jaw. "Hard to say. The damage is worse than we thought. Could take days to fix. And the cost?" He let out a slow breath. "Tens of thousands." Marcus caught movement in his peripheral vision. Karen, standing near the fence, watching. She did not look quite as smug now. And Marcus, he smiled. Karen had played dirty, but Marcus had played smart. With the State Agricultural Department involved, his lawyer on the case, and a felony charge looming, Karen's reign of terror was about to crash down around her, and when she finally realized it, it would be too late. Karen had spent years manipulating this town. She had connections, she had money, and worst of all, she had control. But there was one thing she could not control: the internet. Marcus had spent the night gathering every piece of evidence he could. The security footage from his cameras, grainy but clear enough to show Karen standing near the fence, wire cutters in hand. Photos of the severed power lines, the damages, the dead irrigation system. And then, he went public. At sunrise, Marcus uploaded everything: Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. The caption was simple yet devastating. Last night my farm was sabotaged. My power lines were cut, my crops put at risk, and my business nearly destroyed. And the person responsible? My wealthy, entitled neighbor, Karen Whitmore. She thought she could ruin me and get away with it. But not this time. Not ever again. He tagged local media outlets, the agricultural department, even a few activists who had been fighting against discrimination in small towns like his. Then he put his phone down, and he waited. The response was instant. At first it was just a few likes, a few comments, but within an hour the numbers skyrocketed. Hundreds, then thousands. People from all over the country were sharing the post, calling out Karen's blatant racism and sabotage. This is what black farmers go through. She needs to be arrested. Cutting power to a farm is a felony. Why isn't she in jail? Expose her, ruin her, take everything she tried to take from you. Then, the news outlets picked it up. By the afternoon, a local reporter had called Marcus directly. "We would like to run a story on this," she said. "People need to know what happened." Marcus agreed. And Karen. She was about to feel the full weight of public outrage. The next day, officials from the state agricultural department arrived. Marcus watched from his porch as inspectors surveyed the damages, took statements, and documented everything. They did not ask Karen to come out of her house. They ordered her to. She stepped outside, still in one of her expensive robes, clutching her phone like it was a lifeline. And for the first time, she looked afraid. "This is a misunderstanding," she tried to say, her voice shrill. "I was not involved." But one of the officials cut her off. "We have enough evidence to prove intent," he said coldly. "And under state law, sabotaging an active farm's operation is a serious offense." Karen's face went pale. Then came the fine. $50,000. For damages, loss of product, interfering with a farm's operation. And that was just the beginning. Karen tried to fight it. She hired lawyers, pulled every string she could, but it did not matter, because Marcus was not alone anymore. His story had become a movement. Activists started watching the case. Legal experts stepped in to support him. The news outlets kept publishing updates. Karen lost. And then, she was hit with trespassing charges. The judge ordered her to pay full repair costs, on top of the fine. A smug smile. Gone. Her power. Destroyed. Clifton Ridge had always protected its rich white elite. But this was different. Karen had become a national disgrace. People in town, even the ones who never supported Marcus before, were horrified. They whispered behind her back at the country club. They stopped inviting her to social events. Even the other wealthy families distanced themselves from her. And when the businesses she once supported started losing customers because of their association with her, Karen was officially toxic. One by one, she lost everything. And Marcus, for the first time in a long time, he won. Karen Whitmore had always carried herself with an air of untouchable privilege. For years, she had walked through Clifton Ridge like she owned it. Because in many ways, she did. Her money, her connections, her influence. They had shielded her from consequences. Until now. Because today, she was the one on trial. Marcus walked into the courthouse with his head held high. The room was packed. Reporters, activists, even a few of Karen's former friends who had come just to witness her downfall. Karen sat at the defendant's table, her once perfect posture slumped. She looked exhausted, her usual designer suit hanging loosely on her frame, as if the weight of the past few months had finally crushed her. She did not even look at Marcus. The judge, A stern-faced woman who had clearly lost patience with Karen's games flipped through the paperwork in front of her. "Ms. Whitmore," she said, her voice cold and authoritative, "you have been found liable for trespassing, felony property damage, and willful sabotage of an agricultural business." Karen flinched. "Your attempts to appeal these charges have been denied. You are hereby ordered to pay the full $50,000 fine, in addition to all repair costs totaling an additional $27,000. A sharp gasp rippled through the room. Marcus did not react. He already knew how this would end. But Karen, her entire body tensed, her hands clenching into fists on the table. "That is over $75,000, she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. The judge raised an unimpressed brow. "Yes, it is." Karen opened her mouth like she wanted to argue, but what could she say? The evidence had been overwhelming. Her smugness, her arrogance, her belief that she would never face consequences. They had been her own undoing. The judge gave her one last look. "This court is adjourned." The gavel slammed down. And just like that, Karen Whitmore's empire crumbled. As the courtroom emptied, Marcus did not gloat. He did not smirk. He did not throw her words back in her face. He just smiled. A small, knowing smile, the kind that said he had won without ever having to stoop to her level. Karen finally looked at him then, her eyes hollow. She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something. An insult? A plea? A desperate excuse? But nothing came out. Marcus gave her a polite nod, then turned and walked away. Because his victory was already sealed. The Whitmore estate had been in Karen's family for decades. A sprawling 6-bedroom mansion sitting on 10 acres of prime land, it had been a symbol of her wealth, her power, her status. But after her legal fees, fines, and mounting debts, there was no way she could afford to keep it. Within a month, a for sale sign was planted in the front yard. Karen tried to keep up appearances. She told people she was downsizing for a fresh start. But everyone knew the truth. She was being forced out. And the most poetic part? No one wanted to buy from her. Her name had become a stain on Clifton Ridge. Potential buyers backed out once they heard who had owned it. Even wealthy families who had once socialized with her avoided her like the plague. Karen had become a pariah. And then Marcus made his move. One evening, as Karen stood outside watching movers load the last of her belongings into a truck, she heard footsteps. She turned, and there was Marcus, standing near the fence line. She stiffened. "What do you want?" Marcus let out a slow, satisfied breath as he looked around. "I was just checking out my new property." Karen's face twisted in confusion. "What?" Marcus gestured toward the land next to hers, the 5 acres she had sold off months earlier in a desperate attempt to pay her legal bills. "I bought it," he said simply. Karen's eyes widened. Marcus smiled. "Looks like I belong here after all." Karen's lips parted, but no words came. There was nothing left for her to say. She had tried to erase him. And in the end, she had erased herself. The first thing Marcus noticed was the quiet. For years, Karen Whitmore's presence had been like a storm cloud hanging over his land, always threatening, always lingering. But now, she was gone. No more baseless complaints. No more sabotage. No more entitled smirks from her front porch. A mansion sat empty, the for sale sign still swaying in the breeze, gathering dust. Karen had vanished, disgraced, forgotten, erased. And Marcus? Marcus was thriving. After the trial, Marcus's story continued to spread. What had started as a local scandal had grown into a national conversation. Activists, journalists, and even politicians started talking about black farmers, about discrimination in agriculture, about how many had been pushed out, just like Karen had tried to push Marcus out. But Marcus, he had won. His farm became a symbol, proof that resilience, intelligence, and the right kind of fight could turn the tables on people like Karen. And the support? It was overwhelming. People from all over the country started ordering from his farm. Restaurants put up signs. "We proudly source from Carter Farms." A crowdfunding campaign started to expand his land, his operations, his business. He was not just surviving anymore. He was thriving. Karen had been powerful in Clifton Ridge, and the businesses that had stood by her, protected her, defended her, they paid the price. People boycotted the local shops that had once catered to Karen's every whim. The country club, the same one that had always looked down on Marcus, lost members overnight. Even the town's most influential families distanced themselves, pretending they had never known her. Because in the end, Karen had not just lost. She had taken a whole system down with her. No one knew exactly where Karen went. Some said she moved out of state. Others heard she was living in a small apartment, far from the wealth she once flaunted. But Marcus did not care. He never searched for updates, never asked where she was, because Karen was not important anymore. She had tried to erase him, and instead, she had erased herself. One evening, Marcus stood at the edge of his farm, looking over the land that he had fought for. It was his, not just because of the deed, not just because of the crops, but because he had never let them take it from him. And as he watched the sun set over the fields, he thought about all the others, black farmers, business owners, people who had been pushed out, torn down, silenced. Karen had believed she could take everything from him. But what she did not understand, what people like her never seemed to understand, was that when you stand your ground, when you fight back the right way, justice always wins.